Welcome to Your Biz, Your Rules, the podcast for business-minded go-getters hosted by me, your favourite brain and biz coach, Dara Paddy. This is the spot for those of you ready to blend heart and head, woo and do, income and impact, change and chill, and so much more. So grab yourself a cuppa and let's get started. Welcome to episode 242 of Your Biz, Your Rules. This week I'm joined once again by the wonderful Jamila Theobald for part 2 of our interview. If you haven't checked out the first installment, make sure you go back and listen to last week's episode as soon as you can because we dropped some gems. But before you do that, listen to this week's show and keep that notebook handy because, yes, there'll be plenty of takeaways once again. Okay, so tell us, what is a rule that you have either created or adopted in your business?
I don't think I created it. I definitely know I adopted it because I've heard it before, and it is to be so completely yourself that you give others permission to do the same.
So what does that look like for you?
So I think maybe what it doesn't look like would be a really good place to start.
Okay, go ahead.
So first off, I do have to give a little context to this. I think that we arrive in our adult selves with a lot of childlike tendencies. And part of this is because from like the age of 0 to 7, we are conditioned to behave a certain way for acceptance and for belonging. And sometimes we start to deny parts of ourselves because it doesn't seem appropriate. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem societally acceptable. So you have the girl that, this was me, the girl that would really just be happy not wearing any clothes. Like as a little girl, that was what I did. I loved to run around and just experience like the breeze on my body. Well, that's fine between, 0 to 3. But then as you get older, everybody's like, you need to put clothes on, blah, blah, blah. So denying parts of myself, but also thinking that there's shame. So that's when shame starts to come in at 0 to 7. So you can imagine the layer of shame of your body is not to be shared with the world, or there's something wrong with your body. And that's just one example, but there's so many different examples that we could talk about between even so much from 7 to 14 when we're in school, peer groups, and what's considered acceptable. And so what we tend to do is we start to hide parts of ourselves. We start to become different people, assume different personalities. We put on masks, and we arrive in like our mid 20s to mid 30s with this sense of putting the responsibility on other people to make us feel a certain way. This mantra that I arrived at it when I started to notice the disconnect between who I felt I was internally and then who I felt like I had to be externally with people. I had my own knees on the bathroom floor surrender moment of that kind of, I think it was a collision of the work that I've been doing in self-development, personal development, personal mastery, and what was presented in front of me as society, right? And what I realized in that collision was how much I had been putting onto the rest of the world to make me feel whole, to make me feel safe, to make me feel acceptable, adequate, valuable, worthy. When I started to really look at kind of proverbially taking off the clothes and getting raw and naked with people and just kind of seeing what would happen, not so much for their response, but just to feel completely myself. I started noticing that I could release the sense of anybody else's opinions. I could release the feeling of being judged, partially because I wasn't judging myself anymore. I didn't have the opinions. Now I still have some, so I'm not fully there. But what I've noticed is that every time there's something that I am judging about who I am internally, put that on somebody else as kind of a projection of what I need from them. But the minute that I drop the judgment of myself and be like, you know what, I am a loud person. You know what, I am an ambivert. There are times when I love to be around people when it's the right people. And there are times when I like my energy is a privilege, right? And so being okay with that, like I am truly okay with that. So when somebody calls and says, hey, I want to hang out with you, and I say, I can't this weekend, I don't have a sense of guilt inside. And they don't feel guilty, right? In the past, I would have said, sure, we can hang out, and then kind of been like, I really don't want to go. I'm so tired. I really would rather like just stay in my room with my fuzzy socks and my tea. But I go out and there's this energy. Remember, we talked about this, I think, in the last episode, this energy that you put off where somebody feels obligated. Like they're like, well, you don't have to come out with me if you wanted to just hang, like you start hearing those things, right? So freeing that person from the responsibility to make me feel any sort of way. And that's where it comes back to be so completely yourself that you give others permission to do the same. So my friends in my small circle, they know that if I say, no, I don't want to hang out this weekend, they're not taking that as an affront to them. They genuinely know, oh, this must be the weekend that Jamila needs to just be an introvert and read her books. Because the next weekend I'll say, hey, let's go do something. And they're willingly wanting to go spend some time with me. So it has taken a lot of communication, particularly first communication with myself and then communication with those around me. And you want to talk about radical honesty with self and then with the people around you. What I've noticed the impact of this, where I've noticed the impact of this greatly is on my daughter and my partner, my husband, which is so interesting. That's a whole nother topic that we can explore. But because I have allowed, and we've all had this conversation in our home, I've allowed myself to be me. My daughter is allowed to be herself, and my husband's allowed to be himself. And it has taken some time, but we live in a state of radical acceptance. And the radical honesty is being able to call each other on it. So my daughter has a phrase where she'll just say, don't do that. When she knows that I'm acting out of character, when I'm acting out of alignment of who she can see who I am, right? Hopefully your family are the people that can see you the most. So she'll be like, don't do that. And then it gives her permission to be her 12-year-old radically preteen self.
And I think this is an important direction for this conversation to take, because I think often when we talk about, being ourselves and being seen, we're thinking about it in terms of business, in terms of marketing, but that is only one tiny little fragment of us.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. It's funny that you say that, because I do struggle with, so that's my mission, and it's also my vision, and it's what I communicate in my messaging. And there are moments for real or for sure that I'll sit down and be like, okay, what am I actually saying? Because if I say be you, and what does that really look like for anybody else? What does it look like in marketing and messaging? And to have to have the opportunity to explain what I mean, thank you. So if I were to put this into kind of a reflective practice, to be yourself will always start with radical honesty with yourself. So it's not about you going into your marketing or your messaging or even in relationships and be like, this is me, this is me, deal with it. It's more of, is this in alignment to who I am? Who am I? And that's where, like, that would be the first place to start with. Who am I? When it comes to my biases, when it comes to, you want to talk about radical honesty, like when it comes to my prejudices, when it comes to my privilege, like who am I? When it comes to my fears, who am I? And what I share and explain and teach to my clients is that that's all welcome to the table. Like there are so many parts of ourselves that we say, you're not allowed to exist. When we do this work, we show up in our marketing and our messaging without the need to make other people make us feel a certain way. So who am I? And then we start to invite the parts of ourselves. This is not about being vulnerable for the sake of sharing with the world, right? This is being vulnerable with yourself, sitting down and going, okay, I'm petty. There's a part of me that's petty, and she has a purpose. She sits at the table. She is valuable. When it comes to me seeing injustices in the world, petty shows up, right? I can be very melancholy. I can be very moody. And where I now allow those members to sit at the table with me, there was a period of time where it's like, I'm not allowed to be moody. I'm not allowed to be melancholy. Like I'm the bubbly, like uplifting, energetic person. I don't want this part of me. And so then, of course, by pushing that down, I needed other people to either see that there's moments in my life where I feel very vulnerable. There's moments in my life where I feel like I need you to be able to see that. I need you to notice that. And it creates a really icky feeling. However, in my own table or at my own table, being able to see all those people show up. So who am I? Who's at the table? And then giving them just permission to have their 15 seconds of fame, you know? I have a little petulant child that loves to throw their, as you say over there, throw their toys out the pram. And she now has an opportunity to go outside and stomp in the grass and like throw sticks. That to me is being yourself. When I realized that it wasn't for other people, it was for me. That's the message. Like being yourself is not for other people, it's for you.
And, I think it can take work to even realize who yourself is or what yourself is. I know for me, I spent years wearing this mask of indispensability. Like I needed to be indispensable. That was my mission statement, because when I felt needed, when I felt indispensable, I felt seen. Mm-hmm. I felt like I wasn't invisible. I felt like I was actually there in the room, in the relationship, whatever. And I considered that to be just part of my identity for such a long time. And it was only when I started doing like a radical amount of the inner work and asking myself questions like who would I be if I didn't need to be needed? Like who would I actually be? Mm-hmm. That's when I started to understand these different parts of me that are more real, that are more mm-hmm. true to who I am, not just a consequence of like bullshit childhood conditioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's, you said it can take a long time. I agree. And I think part of the reason why it takes such a long time is because when those other parts of yourself start showing up, they don't always look pretty. Like they're not the shiny, like, ooh, I love that I am this butterfly type person. Like it's the like dog shit parts of yourselves, right? It's like
it's things like realizing that you are angry.
Yeah.
And emotions like that, because those are things that we automatically reject. Like we say anger is bad, therefore I am not going to be angry. Yeah. I am a good girl. That's not what we do.
Yeah. Well, and then even so much the interpretation of what is anger. How do we're taught that anger is uncontrolled rage and it can really harm people. And so we're like, well, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that, torches every path that I go through. So we stuff that down. But yeah, anger, jealousy, greedy, shame, like all the things that we don't really want to sit with. That's what prolongs the experience.
And grief.
Oh my gosh, grief for sure. Rejection. The feeling of being rejected or
silenced.
We
could do this all day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Let's just talk about all the the intestines of being a human. Yeah. And what I realized, what's interesting, part of the phrase be so completely yourself, what I realize is that when you can share from a place of cool processing. So I talk about in my coaching, I talk about warm processing and cool processing. So we could be angry, for example, and we're trying to share from that place of being angry. Like, I am angry and this is part of who I am. And unfortunately, because we haven't really embodied and integrated the sense of anger, again, we're putting that on somebody else to then give us, what we're missing and what we need. But when you can cool process it and you're like, okay, there are times when I get angry and these are those times. And when I get angry, this is how I behave. And it's okay to process that way. What ends up happening is that you start noticing that other people start responding with, I get angry too. Or I feel rejection too. And it what's starting to happen in my world is this recognition of what we are creating as this illusion of separation is that you don't feel this way. I am the only one that feels this way. I must be the only one that's experiencing this. Nobody else is experiencing the pain of grief, for example. We know logically that other people experience grief, but we can't feel that sense of connection that grief is a universal human experience. When we are truly in touch with that, then all of a sudden it's like, I don't need you to fix my grief. I need you to sit with it because I know you experience it too. I don't need you to understand it because I know you understand it too. And it's this beautiful thing that starts happening, like, oh,
there is this unique kind of magic that happens when you connect with someone, you have a conversation and they let you know that they feel exactly what you're feeling or they've experienced exactly what you've experienced.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's like suddenly there is something lifted off your chest and you can breathe again because it's like, oh my God, like I am not weird and I'm not broken. This is just a thing that people deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is the part of being able to, in yoga, we call it sitting with the sensation, sitting with the feeling. You got to feel it to heal it. It's not always easy and pretty. There are lots of tools that have helped me kind of, even so much with anger. There's a lot of tools that I've used to help me really harness the energy and the power and the beauty of anger. Because on the opposite of anger is another emotion. Sometimes it can be love. Like, I have loved something so much that it has created this rage of like fury and passion. One of the books I love is Marianne Williamson's Return to Love. It's like, can we find love in every single emotional experience that we have as humans? Like, is that the part of emotional mastery and emotional maturity, is finding those parts of ourselves that we really, really don't want to deal with, and then just sitting with it and seeing, if we go into the center of it, finding the light, finding the love that's in it. Is it a process that, like, logically we all want to step into? Absolutely not. It's like asking somebody, do you want to walk into a spider web? Like, nobody really, I'll volunteer. It's all over.
As much as we say things like it's going to be messy, it's going to be uncomfortable, I actually think a lot of the time it's easier than you think.
Really?
Yeah, because I think there are maybe emotions or memories that we don't want to revisit because we're like, if I go near that, it is going to open the floodgates and it's going to fatten me and I will die. Like, I will not be able to pick myself back up from this. And not usually, sometimes it can be like sort of the fear and the catastrophe that you create in your mind around that thing that creates more pain and more discomfort than the thing itself.
What's interesting is that just clicked for me. It's the mental drama that we have to go through that is the challenge. But actually, like, just releasing that icky emotion can be so quick. But yeah, the mental drama is like, whew, that's the spider web for sure. For sure. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, and this is a really good example. I think one of the things that you and I have had the opportunity to do is to see and witness the kind of the depths of our humanity and the not so, not so glossy boss bitch babes. And in that, just even in that experience, to be able to then learn from each other. Like there's a sense of, it's almost like there's a sense of divine humanity, that comes when you just own who you are. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I love that.
Divine humanity. I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah.
Trademarked.
Yeah, I see that as a program name or something.
Yeah,
could definitely be a thing. So when you talk about being like so yourself, being unapologetically yourself, I know that there are going to be people listening who are maybe halfway there, or they're dipping their toe in, and particularly in the context of business. And so to those people, like, do you have any recommendations for really going all in with that energy?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think it's a more fun approach. And that is, notice how you receive compliments. And the reason why I say that is because one of the areas that most of my clients and people that I'm around, they are so brilliant, yet cannot receive a compliment. And it's like, that's unapologetically owning who you are, is notice how you receive a compliment. So I've taught others to kind of practice and play with, okay, just thank you. That's enough. Thank you. Don't try to make up an excuse. Don't come back with a contradictory, like, thank you, but just say thank you. The other one is, so that's the first level. The second level is, I receive that. So as somebody compliments you, receive it. It's a gift. They're giving you a gift. Own that unapologetically. If they say, you're brilliant at this, I receive that. And then the next level, so level 1 is thank you. Level 2 is I receive that. The next level is, it is true. So much, like, there's a fun part of it, because what you'll start to notice is everything in your head that says, I can't say that. How dare I say it is true? Like, that is so arrogant and egotistical. But that's part of the practice. Is there's the side of doing the work to pull up all the drudgery of the shadow and allowing that to sit at the table. And then there's the other part of owning your greatness, owning your brilliance, owning the fact that you are this magical, multidimensional, spiritual being having a human experience. So if you don't want to sit there with the shadow, then at least allow yourself to sit there with the divine, like the divine parts of you, and just start with thank you. And I receive that. And then play with, yeah, that's true.
And I feel like a good little way of sort of checking in with yourself and seeing if you really are being fully yourself is paying attention to the language you use internally. Yes. Like, if you notice yourself saying things like, oh, I can do that when.
Yes.
That's a sign that you're not being fully you, because you're creating this agreement with yourself. You're sort of installing this suggestion that you have to qualify that action with something else.
For sure. When this happens, then I'll be worthy. I'll be, the inner dialogue is very interesting. I was watching something the other day, and I don't know if this is in fact the case, but there was a group of, I think they were 20-year-olds, and they were talking about this third person that lives inside their head. It was so interesting, because I was like, our language would have been like the inner critic, right? So the next generation, they're talking about this third person that has taken up residency in their head, and they're constantly having this dialogue. And whether it's a third person that's sitting in your head or it's your inner critic, that conversation right there, what you were just saying, I think that is the epitome of why I keep going back to be so completely yourself. because it's who are you when you are sitting alone in your own company? Like, can we arrive to a place where we are comfortable with being in our own company on the shit days and on the great days, like, or in this moment versus when I finally, then I'll be this person. No,
I think that's an important thing to acknowledge too, is that who we are is not the same day in, day out.
ooh, that's good.
There is no such thing as a consistent human being. Like, we are very different people based on, you know, the season of life we're in, the part of the cycle we're in, the sort of the physical environment we're in, the conversations that we've just had with loved ones. Like, we can be entirely different people.
But what about consistency?
It's a myth.
That's another rule that I have broken in my business. I hate the word consistency. I've also released a few other words. And why is it goes right back to what you said. Like, today, I am not the same person that I was yesterday. Like, there are cells in my body that have regenerated. I cannot, yeah. And so to say that I'm going to show up consistently, like, there, to me, so the phrase that I've replaced it with is showing up generously. So sometimes generously for me means not showing up on, like, in a visual way, because energetically I'm not in the right place. And so the most generous thing that I can do for my audience is to create some space. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then other times I will pour in content over and over and over again, and just give from a place of what my vessel contains in the moment. And some days, like you said, seasonally, cyclically, some days it's not, I'm not the same person as I was. Like, certain days of my cycle, for example, I know I cycle sync, and I know that there are certain days where it's like, this is the time to just show up, be visible. And then other days, it's like, this is the time to just hibernate.
And I think on a very micro level, you might even not notice some of these shifts, like, from day to day. But if you do things like read personal development books, even if you read like one chapter a day, that is like one tiny little fragment of your thinking that has shifted day on day on day. And no, you might not notice it Tuesday to Wednesday, but you might notice it month to month.
Oh, yeah.
And the same with if you experience things like healing, breath work, tapping, any kind of somatic shifting, you will be like recalibrating your internal world with every one of those actions. And when that happens, you stop being the version of you that you used to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. With human design, they say we change every 7 years. And because of the life cycle of a cell is 7 years, there's certain parts of ourselves that, you know, structurally stay the same. But as far as like our mental processes and experiences, they create a new individual every 7 years. So I don't know. I think that, yeah, on a micro level, for sure. I have a friend that when we talk, she'll say something about like, so for today, this is how I feel, or this is how I'm thinking, and this is what I'm doing for today. Tomorrow might be different. Yesterday certainly was different, but for today. So I think that that's a really helpful mantra to have too. I feel excited for today.
Well, it's another one of those opportunities to create a Me Too moment with the people that you engage with, because the reality is they all fluctuate too, and they're probably sat in a corner stressing about the fact that they're not consistent, or stressing about the fact that they feel so up and down. And if you can share that reality with people, then they get to breathe that sigh of relief and realize, oh my God, I'm not a freak.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's so interesting because there are a few people in my life, I think about this, that are pretty predictable in the sense like, but maybe it's because I spend so much time, like my husband, for example, I spend so much time with him, and he has routines, even so much in what he's learning, Like he will repeat, he's into history, right? And so there's not so much that has changed in the history books other than maybe perspectives, but he reads these books like they're like brand new news. It's like, wait a minute. That still happened on the same day at the same time with the same generals, right? But that's for him, that's comforting, because when he does make shifts, he'll come back to those knowings that history will not change. And there's a few other people that I know, and I wonder if there's space and room to just even coming back to that my mantra or my mission. There's space and room for us to just not know how other people operate, how other people perceive things, how other people experience things. And just showing up. And then by showing up, we give people permission to then tune in and go, okay, that's not like me, or that is like, it's this dance between, using the term very intentionally, it's this dance between being egocentric and, I can't remember what the term was for externally centric, but recognizing what your experience is, and then recognizing that other people have a different experience, or they could have a similar experience,
Well, it really comes back to that piece that we started out with of like, be so much yourself that you give other people permission to do the same, whether that is the same as you or not.
Yeah, for sure. Allocentric, that was the other word. Allocentric is with other people. Yes, because I think that, so it's interesting, with one of the elements of autism is on the spectrum is the sense of egocentricities, and not being able to really recognize that other people have different experiences. And I think I mentioned in the last episode that we discovered that my husband has autism, and he's on the spectrum. And one of the elements that he has is not being able to recognize that I can see something completely different from him. So that has led to a lot of communication struggles and challenges over the course of our relationship. And the beauty of what was revealed with, say, a diagnosis, for example, was me being able to really like go in and study this, and for us to sit down together to see that he lives this be so completely yourself, right? But the part that was missing was giving other people permission to do the same, because he would engage into these arguments that like, no, the way that he sees things is the right way. And so therefore everybody else has no clue, and everybody else just can't figure things out. And we would have very challenging conversations of him not being able to see that there are other people. As I've done this work with really honing into how to teach other people, like how to own themselves and own their truth and own their individuality, I do look to him, because like there's really no other person that I've met in this world that's like, this is who I am, and this is like, that's just how it's going to be. But the other side of that is me really learning how to communicate with him that just because you are this way, you don't take away from other people having rights and responsibilities as well, right? And so there's a beautiful thing that has grown in our relationship for us to both recognize that me being right does not make you wrong. Like my truth and your truth may not be the absolute truth. And that's the other element of being so completely yourself, that there's no need to force your opinions or your way of doing things on other people, because you can still have your truth, and that's cool, but there isn't a push that happens in order for you to feel validation or feel worth, that you need to make somebody else like, this is the law.
You don't have to make somebody else wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to make somebody else wrong because you've believe that you're right.
Interesting. I feel like I just had a little bit of a light bulb moment about some of the things that we see in the coaching world, because
Mm.
it's one of those marketing trends that I've just been very aware of recently, with a lot of people writing posts that sort of either subtly or not so subtly tear down the way that other people do business in order to showcase their better way.
Mhm.
And it's kind of making me think of this. It's making me think of this conversation of like, these people are not just, being so completely themselves. They are focusing on making other people wrong.
Yeah. And I've found myself doing that. And, that's when I went back to the drawing board and thought, is this really how I want my marketing and messaging to go? As to point out where everybody else is doing something wrong and like the audaciousness of other people. And it's like,
But do you know what? Like when does that actually ever work? Like when has somebody ever come to you and said, you're doing this wrong, or like don't follow them because they're doing this wrong? You're not going to listen to them. You're still going to do what you want to do,
yeah.
even
Yeah,
if they are
I
right.
agree. And it's not going to correct the quote unquote correct the behavior either, right? Like if I
No.
told you you're doing this wrong, you're like, oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm going to go change the way I'm doing it now because it has worked for me for the last yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a level of disruption that does get to happen, but I think that can happen again just by us being ourselves.
Mm.
Because that's the part that I feel like we step out of doing things because we think we should, or doing things that we've been conditioned to do.
Mm.
And we start to take those masks off. Part of us being ourselves
Mm.
is enough to go, okay, I I don't need to make somebody else wrong in order for me to just show up as me, right?
And I mean, I do think there's a little bit of nuance there too, in that I'm not talking here about, things that are ethically dubious, things that are like, wrong in that kind of way. Because I think it is important that we like sort of stand up and we have those conversations and we create conscious conversation around difficult topics, and talking more about sort of the business practices, because like we mentioned in the last episode, everything has the capacity to work for some people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think going to what you said, as far as there are definitely ethical conversations that need to happen, for sure. One of the biggest ones that I speak on is the role of a leader versus the role of a manager. And there's a lot of leaders in the world. And I think there needs to be. However, what I do believe is that leadership comes with an immense amount of responsibility for integrity, for the use of power. Because I think we all have to recognize that when you are in any position of leadership, you're going to have people that are listening to every single thing that you say as the gospel sometimes, and they're looking at how you are carrying yourself, and they're looking at like what sometimes even people are looking for where there is like disconnect. And so you can call yourself a leader, and like I mentioned earlier, having the position, but not having the personal mastery, not having the personal power. Those things are important. And so, yeah, calling out those parts. And then that comes back to like, how do you completely be yourself as a leader? Right. I've had several conversations with CEOs about like, well, my people expect me to be this way. And so I can't just show up like I would show up on a Saturday, haggard or what have you. And it's funny because I'll have conversations with there's one particular CEO, and I won't say her name, but she'll definitely identify herself. But she carries herself with such an immense amount of responsibility. That's how I see it: responsibility and authority. And at the same time, she is so terrified that she's going to let people down. It's a sense of that's what she has ascribed to be her motivating. And we've talked, in private about being able to just release that responsibility in the privacy of our own space, right? So again, it's not about going to your team and being like, I feel so vulnerable and like I'm so scared and I'm worried. That's not what this is about. It's about where are you taking on so much responsibility to the detriment of your leadership? And just having a real heart-to-heart with, that responsibility is something that she has been carrying with her. And it's not even it's a true responsibility in the mental story that she has, for sure. But it's the energetic responsibility that she has carried for years of making sure that everybody else is safe, is taken care of. And so when she is sitting at home at like 7 p.m., the weight on her shoulders, she can't put it down, right? So then she shows up and she's very much like, I need to make sure this is happening. I need to, like, there's a sense of control that she needs to have for those that are around her. And it's not that she is projecting this onto her team. It's what's happening with her energetically and internally. That personal mastery, that being able to exhale, take a sigh of relief to go, even without that, you can still run it. You can still run a business. Like, let's see if we can start separating. And that was one of the beautiful exercises we did. We separated out that sense of responsibility and certain events that were happening. She's still going to show up as a badass. Like, she still shows up as a powerhouse. But when we're able to take a little bit of that mask off for her to be able to see herself, to know that she's human, that she doesn't have the capacity to take responsibility for everybody else, energetically, mentally, mindset wise. And with that, releasing that social construct conditioning that she was given years ago, she is able to show up to her team on that day, right? On that particular day, she's able to show up to her team, and there's a sense of levity that's happening that I get to see. It's like this levity of, they don't feel the immense amount of pressure to alleviate her sense of needing to be responsible. Mm-hmm. And it does happen on a micro level. It's like this microscopic, cellular, energetic level of like, wow, she just shows up, and she shows up as herself, and they're like, oh, we take care of this and we'll take care of this. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
We've jumped into so much good stuff in this episode. So to wrap up, I think I have a feeling you're going to like this question. Okay. What is a song that makes you feel like the best version of yourself, that makes you feel unstoppable?
Oh, just one? I have a whole playlist.
You can share a few if you like.
So definitely Girl on Fire by Alicia Keys. Love that. Alien Superstar by Beyonce. There's a part where like she spells out unique, and it's like, yes, that is a beautiful, beautiful song. And then I would have to say Earth, Wind and Fire, Fantasy.
Nice choice.
Love that song.
Well, I will add all of those to our Your Biz, Your Rules playlist, which for everyone listening is linked in the show notes. So definitely go check that out and have a little boogie. Thank you so much for joining me today. Like, this show and also the last episode that we did together, I feel like there's so much good stuff that if people really sit with it, with their notebooks, take some notes, take some action, they could make some really big shifts in how they're showing up in the world, which is, what it's all about.
Aw, well, thank you so much for having me. Like, it's a gift to be in your space. Absolutely. And I just loved the moments that we spent together and this time. So thank you so much for having me.
That's so nice. Thank you for listening to Your Biz, Your Rules. I know that we all like to listen to podcasts, watch videos, read articles or books or posts on Facebook, and not really do anything with that information. So I want to challenge you right now. I want to challenge you to take something from this episode, anything, and use it to spark action. Use it to activate some kind of change in the way you work and the way you live. Do yourself this service today. And tell me all about it on Instagram. Hop over, shoot me a DM, or share an Instagram story showcasing what action you are taking thanks to this episode. And of course, do all of the usual things. Subscribe, leave a review, let me know how much you love the show, and I will be back with you next week.